Welcome to Good Medicine, and going to talk about three things today. First is the CDC change in the mask guidelines, and the second is 12 to 15-year-olds taking the Pfizer vaccine, and the third is emergency use authorization versus licensure by the FDA. What is the difference? First off, shout out to my daughter and son-in-law Tyson and Emma Faulkner in Texas. I wore this one for you, and shout out to the entire Faulkner family in Abilene, Texas, and Dallas, Texas. All right, first, CDC Masks Guidelines. Now, if you are vaccinated, there's almost no place you need to wear a mask. Some public places like buses, transportation, you can look at the list on the CDC, but basically it's saying that if you have a vaccine, you will not give the virus to other people, and you're safe to other people. That's the big message here. People are very critical about the CDC because they are in the limelight now. From my perspective as a medical person, and I still rely on the CDC. They're not my only source. Don't get me wrong. I am not blindly following the CDC. I am intelligently and knowingly following a lot of the CDC because they agree with what I think also. If I thought they were doing something wrong, I would let you know. Now, are they perfect? No. There is not a single perfect public health policy that you could make out. Somebody would be upset by it somewhere. So, this policy of guidelines decreasing the need for vaccinated people to wear a mask, maybe it's late coming in some people's mind. Maybe it shouldn't have happened now. I didn't mind continuing to wear a mask. I always said after I got my vaccination way back in December and January that I wore a mask not because I thought I really needed to, because every time I put it on, I was like, why do I do this? I know I don't really need to. The reason I did it was solidarity. I wanted to say to my friends around me and those around me that I don't even know that I'm in this with you. I didn't want to stick out and say, I've got a vaccine, you don't. I don't have to wear a mask. So, in a way, I felt like our solidarity going forward as a culture was good for us all to wear a mask. But I think the reality is right now, there's so many people that are vaccinated, so many people that are ready to take the masks off. I think it's also good that they recognize that there's almost no risk of transmission of this virus when you're outside and in the open and a little distance between you. So I'm all for the vaccine vaccinated people taking the mask off. It just encourages you, if you're not vaccinated, go ahead. It's nice to take the mask off. 12 to 15-year-olds with the Pfizer vaccine. So they did do studies on them that they were smaller, but they were enough numbers because we already know this to show that it acts about the same in the 12 to 15-year-olds as it does in adults. So, safety, here's the things that were reported in over 2,000 kids that received this vaccine: pain, tiredness, headache, chills, muscle aches, fever, joint pains. Sound pretty familiar? It's the same as what we found in adults, so there was nothing new found. Effectiveness, out of two groups, the vaccinated group, there were zero infections in the vaccinated group, and there were 16 infections in the unvaccinated group in the placebo controlled trial. So, very similar to findings in adults. They also drew blood levels of immunity in the 12 to 15-year-olds and compared it to similar 16 to 25-year-olds, and they were found to be non inferior, or that just means similar in medical speak. So I think it's safe. That's safe. It's effective. They've had the studies. Really, there's not a lot of difference between the reaction of a 12 to 15-year-old between that and a 16 to 25-year-old. So it works for both parties. We're learning more. We've had now hundreds of millions of people that have received these vaccines, and they're doing quite well. All right. What is an EUA versus a licensure? So I have a lot of my patients that are vaccine hesitators that I enjoy talking to and encouraging them. And in fact, every day in my office, I think I talk to one or two people who come into my office hesitating and then decide to go ahead and get the vaccine after some conversation. So, one of the things I hear the most is, I don't want to be a guinea pig. This is an unapproved product. All right. This is an FDA approved product. It was done by a different path than licensure. So there's two ways to get your vaccine on the market. One is emergency use authorization, which was done in this case, and it's used for pandemics just like this. The other is through licensure. The only difference between the two is that EUA is streamlined. The same testing is done, the same scrutiny is done, the same people evaluate it. Now, what happened with EUA? Testing and production happen simultaneously. In licensure, a manufacturer will test, but they won't mass produce it. They'll test it, they'll get their approval first, then they'll mass produce. A lot of that has to do with money. In this case, the federal government stepped in, provided funds for the manufacturers. And that was Operation Warp Speed, and it provided millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars to these vaccine manufacturers so that they could go ahead and mass produce as they were testing. And so whenever they got the emergency use authorization, they were ready the next day to give these vaccines. That is the only difference, people. You are not being treated as a guinea pig. Every prescription medicine you've ever taken before has had the same scrutiny, the same phase 3 studies that this one has. So every vaccine's had the same kind of scrutiny and testing as these emergency use ones have had. The only difference is the streamlining that our government did to get them out, which is exactly what you want to do to a pandemic. So you're not a guinea pig. You're not being tested on. Now, there is post-marketing surveillance of all these that's done with every product that's approved by the FDA. And in fact, these vaccines are probably more scrutinized than most any other product. So I think the safety is very good for these vaccines. People wonder, well, there's not been enough time gone by. Well, there's been a year for the phase 1 participants, and now we're getting to a year for the phase 2 participants. So we're getting larger and larger numbers who are a year out. I just don't think you're going to see anything come long term of these. People talk about, well, a hyperimmune response or a immune boosting response. Those are theories that are not very well vetted at all, and they're just not being shown to be true. There have been so many vaccines that have been approved over the last 25 years that I've been watching medicine, and none of those things have happened. So I don't expect anything more to happen. I think you're going to see the same things happen, the pain, tiredness, fatigue, headaches, chills, those sort of things happen as short-term side effects to these vaccines. So CDC and masks, it's nice to take the mask off, get vaccinated if you haven't already. 12 to 15-year-olds, I think it's fine for them to get the Pfizer vaccine. Moderna is going to be doing their studies, and we'll let you know. And emergency use is just streamlined licensure. It's the same organization, the same process. I hope this has been helpful. If you have questions, instant message me. I'll be happy to respond.